I continually hear this question: what should I have in my Go Kit? I'm going to be a little crass and answer it in one sentence. You should have everything you need. Now, with that said, let's go to something a little more valuable and talk about what do you need? I'll give you some answers based on what I have in my car. What I have in my car is what I feel I need generally, and then we'll talk about some things that I carry when I have very specific needs on certain events. I'm probably going to blow some minds with this first slide. It's called a list of standard items, and it's one of about a half a dozen slides of this. But the first 4 items there have nothing to do with ham radio, and yet they have everything to do with your ability to function in a situation. I keep a roll of paper towels, a roll of toilet paper. I keep them in a plastic bag because I found out they get messed up if I don't. I usually have a couple bottles of bottled water, a couple of food bars, and some spare clothing in a suitcase which has almost anything that I would need if I had to live out for about 3 or 4 days. I started carrying that suitcase in about 2001 when I was on the road a lot for my job. And then I've continued to carry it because it's met my needs a few times. It has things like a toothbrush, a shaver, all kinds of spare clothing, double up on socks because they get wet, and things like that. Ironically, on one of the first public service events, I wound up using every change of clothing and was getting pretty wet on the last hour of the day. It is a good thing to have. Gee, we go to the second slide, and it doesn't have any ham radio equipment. It's a blanket, a sleeping bag, a bath towel, a pack of meds, and a first aid kit. That blanket can be a godsend if you wind up with a person who's hurt. The sleeping bag can be a godsend if you have to sleep out or sleep in the car. Even if it's warm weather, the sleeping bag can be used as at least some sort of padding. The bath towel can either be used to throw under somebody who's wet who's climbing in the car, or it can be folded and used as a makeshift pillow. And believe me, I've done all of these. You also should have at least a small pack of meds. I recommend a few Tylenol. For me, I need Benadryl. And also you need a first aid kit. It doesn't have to be extensive. It just has to have some stuff in it that you need to patch things up. One of the things that I do recommend that's kind of EMT is a good tourniquet, but only get one if you have the training in Stop the Bleed. Now we'll get to the things that I always carry. A ham license. I have the little wallet-sized card one in my wallet. I have a driver's license. Better have one of those if we're driving a car. I keep my carry permit there, although in most cases I do not carry. I keep at least 2 credit cards. And I keep a small amount of cash. Let's call it get-home money. I have enough in there for food and gas to get home. Some of that is not carried on my person. I try not to carry significant quantities of cash, and someone would have a heck of a time finding it where it's at. I carry a spare set of keys for the car, but they're in the car, locked in. I have a keypad entry, and I can remember the code to get in. The glove compartment has spare fuses and a fuse puller. You can't get those fuses out and in without a fuse puller. If you don't have one, get one. I make sure I have the manual for the car. Believe it or not, at times that has saved me a lot of trouble being able to turn off something that wasn't needed. I have a set of maps: Pennsylvania State Road Map, a Pennsylvania Contour Map. It's a book, not the big ones. And I have a hiking GPS. Look, that's my first electronics. And I keep a spare battery for it, by the way. You know that a GPS is worthless when the battery goes dead? I use the hiking GPS to locate myself on the map. I keep 2 hats in the car, a summer one and a winter one. And I keep a couple of spare store bags. I wear a knit hat in the winter, but if it happens to be raining or snowing, that thing becomes a liability unless you can put something over it to keep it dry. I keep 2 pairs of gloves, a pair of work gloves and a pair of gloves, of course, that are good for cold. The work gloves are nice if you have to handle some things that are heavy. It can prevent you from having to use the first aid kit to fix cuts and bruises in your hands. I carry a pair of boots most of the time. They're definitely there in the winter and when it's wet. Just remember, none of this has any value if you do not know how to use it. Then, of course, I carry assorted bungee cords and I have some lengths of rope. I'll answer an obvious question here. I was never a Boy Scout and I was never in the military, but I grew up in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. I have waterproof matches and a magnesium stirrup to start a fire and some tinder in case I need it. I haven't had to use it, but there's always a first time. I have 2 rolls of coaxial cable in the car that are about 80 feet long each. One's RG8X and the other is LMR 200. LMR 200 is about 2/3 the diameter of LMR 400 and has almost the same loss characteristics. It's a lot easier to handle and it's just about as good. I keep barrel connectors screwed into the end of each one of those so that if I have to cascade them, I can. If I don't need the barrel connector, I unscrew it, put it in my pocket, and then remember to put it back later. I carry a few adapters for SO239 and F connectors to BNCs and to SMAs. You never know what you're going to need. 2 or 3 adapters can get you out. I've had occasions where I've had 3 adapters cascaded back to back to get where I needed to be. I carry a number 16 50-foot AC extension cord with a 3-way connector on the end. I haven't needed more than that. People sometimes carry power strips. I personally don't like to and don't do it. I also have 2 inverters in the car, a 400 watt and a 100 watt. I carry a minimum of tools. There are about 200 feet of paracord in there. It's saved me a few times. I have a 28-ounce hatchet and a pair of pump pliers, a pair of vice grips, a couple sets of other pliers, cutters, screwdrivers, the standard tools. I don't carry anything really exotic. I don't have room for it, if you hadn't noticed. By the way, I'm widowed and I don't have children living with me, so I don't have a problem putting a few things in the car. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of items: a 12-volt soldering iron, solder, a few pieces of assorted wire. These don't put in your car if you don't know how to use them. You're probably going to be paired with somebody else, if that's the case, who knows knowledge of how to use it, and he probably has one as well. So you're just being redundant. I keep a 10-foot piece of number 6 dual wire with power poles. I can extend a 12-volt battery about that far if I have to. You don't want to go much further than that. I have 2 3-foot coax jumper cables that are nice if you have to hook an inline SWR meter or something of that sort. You have something to work with. I'll catch some flack for what I'm going to say here, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are those who will tell you never crimp anything, it won't stay together. They're half right. There are those who say crimp connectors are the greatest thing around. They're half right. If you have the proper tools and the proper knowledge, crimp connectors are great. But if you don't use them. Now I'm going to tell you the reverse. I carry 2 or 3 of these all the time. They're in my kit. I don't think I've used one in 5 years. But if I have a piece of coax that goes bad and I need to put a connector on, my 12-watt soldering iron is not going to make it hot enough to put a piece of RG8X into a connector. So I'm going to use the crimp connector, and when it comes home, it's going to get cut off and a good solder connector put on. I also carry an NVIS antenna and a small Go kit. I will be doing another video on that small Go kit at a future date. It's something that is a stopgap, but not the ultimate. I chuckle when I see a ham lugging a 240 amp hour deep cycle battery out to a location to run for 4 hours. If I'm going to run longer, I need more power. I have other solutions. But when I'm only going to be there for 10 hours or less, a 30 amp hour 12 volt lawn tractor battery will do. One thing, that battery must be in some sort of a plastic case. There are some good ammunition boxes. There are oversized plastic ammunition boxes that will do the job. Get yourself a cheap multimeter. Go to Harbor Freight. Don't take a $300 fluke out in the mountain. Get an SWR meter. Again, get an inexpensive one that you can afford to take along so that if something happens to it, it's gone. I personally carry an Elk 2 70 centimeter beam that I sometimes use if I've got a long distance repeater and need something to get to it. I also use it whenever I go out contesting during a VHF contest and I'm using sideband on that antenna. I do want to say one other thing about the Elk. Although I carry it and keep it in the car, it goes into a very small case. I don't recommend it necessarily as a mandatory piece of equipment, but as one that's really nice to have. I keep a spare vertical antenna in the car that can be screwed on. My mounts are all standard. My antennas are all standard. Any antenna can be taken off and put on any other mount. I also keep a spare vertical on a magnet, just in case I need it. I also have 12 of the metal stakes that I use for all kinds of things. Anything that needs to be staked down. I've actually staked down a table with a couple of bungee cords across it to keep it from rocking. You just have to get creative when you have a problem. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about items that get loaded depending on the event. If I'm going to an event that could last a couple of days, I make sure that I have full meds for a week. Insulin, needles, you name it. I also have food for a few days. I don't care if they're going to feed me. I carry food for a few days. It can be food bars, liquid meals, etc. If I'm going to be going somewhere where I'm not sure about being fed, I take a camp stove, a cooler, water cooler, ice. I also take cooking items like an Army mess set and a folding table. I have what I need. The most important part of that station, no matter how you cut it, is you. If you're not functional, the station is not functional. If you don't have food and you pass out, the station is no longer functioning. If you are not functional because you've dehydrated, you're not functional. You need to carry what takes care of you. A friend of mine has a statement with our SAR team: you're of no value in the back of an ambulance. I also carry an easy up with walls and a floor if the event dictates it. That's one of those things that they lie and tell you it's easy up, and it isn't. The one I have has walls and a floor. I have weights to hold it down. They're actually a piece of sonnet tube filled with concrete with a handle. I usually carry 2 folding chairs, a folding lounge. I can sleep on it if I have to. This is in long-term events. And in many of those, I carry an HF, VHF, UHF digital go kit. It has everything in it. It has an FT 8900 FM quad band, an FT 857 multi-band, multi-mode transceiver, a signal link, a switching power supply, a SG YT100 antenna tuner, a switching unit to allow me to power it off of either AC or DC, and some unique switching to handle being able to not have to get in the back of the radio to plug in a set of headphones. In fact, it allows me to use headphones and a speaker at the same time. I'll be dealing with this piece of equipment later. Right now, I'm not real proud of it. It was built 10 years ago when I didn't really know what I was doing. Been adapted a little bit and needs some work. I want to show you a little bit of the things that I carry. The item that's the piece of plywood, I have numbers on them, but I'm not sure you can see them. The piece of plywood has a floor flange screwed to it. The plywood is a double piece of 3/4 inch ply glued together and has a couple of screws in it just to make sure. The floor flange was bored out because it wouldn't take a 5/16 inch bolt and is bolted down. The bolts are carriage bolts from the underside. This goes down on the ground. You run the car tire up on it. You screw in the piece of pipe. You put on this piece of drain tailpipe. It's used on the bottom of a sink. And then this fiberglass pole, and I usually carry several more of them, slide on top to give you a 20-foot roughly vertical. It's a good arrangement. It works. It's a little difficult for one person to set up. The second thing is a piece of 4-foot long PVC drain pipe with plugs on both ends. I keep my elk antenna and some other delicate stuff like this vertical in it. The next thing are a group of metal stakes that I bought at a place called Coleman's Supply. It's a surplus dealer. That's also where I bought the poles. You probably can't tell, but the little item above is a slingshot. That slingshot with a roll of 50-pound test line and a couple of 3/4 ounce sinkers can be a godsend when you need to get an antenna up in the air in a bad situation. You can either use it to pull up wire or lift a very light Slim Jim. The next thing is a 14-inch UHF VHF antenna that I can screw on my car when I'm in the mountains so that I don't have something flapping in the wings. Wind is bad. These are all things that are available in the car, and it's been used at times. I put this one on the car whenever I have to go into low areas like parking garages. All of this stuff has very little value, however, if you don't know how to use it. And in a future video, I'm going to do something on my 2 go kits. I have one out there on my 20-foot freestanding vertical antenna mount. Thanks for watching. This is K3HQI saying 7 threes, best to you, and we'll see you around the bands.